They told him he didn't look the part. They told him first class wasn't for people like him. When Silas Blackwood boarded Flight 802 to London, he was holding a valid ticket for seat 1A. But by the time the cabin doors closed, he was being threatened with arrest, humiliated in front of 200 people, and stripped of his dignity. They thought they had won. They thought he was just another passenger they could bully. They were wrong. One phone call from his lawyer didn't just clear his name. It dissolved their careers, bankrupted a legacy, and left an entire boardroom begging for mercy. This is the story of the day the airlines learned. Never judge a king by his quiet. The air inside JFK International Airport was thick with the scent of overpriced coffee and the palpable anxiety of holiday travel. Outside Terminal 4, the rain hammered against the glass, but inside, the ecosystem of class warfare was in full swing. Silas Blackwood adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke charcoal suit. He wasn't a man who enjoyed attention. In fact, silence was his preferred currency. At 42, Silas was the founder and CEO of Apex Zenith, a private equity firm that specialized in acquiring distressed assets. He was known in financial circles as the Silencer, because he didn't bark, he didn't threaten. He simply acquired you, dismantled you, or saved you, depending on his mood. Today he was tired. He had just closed a grueling 70-hour negotiation in New York and was flying to London to sign the final papers for a merger that would reshape the European logistics market. All he wanted was a glass of sparkling water, his noise-cancelling headphones, and 10 hours of sleep in Seat 1A on Pan Atlantic Airways, Flight 802. He approached the gate. The gate agent, a harried woman named Patricia, scanned his boarding pass. She paused, looking from the screen to Silas, then back to the screen. "Passport?" she asked. Her voice clipped. Silas handed it over. She flipped through it aggressively, checking the visa pages as if looking for a reason to deny him. Finding none, she handed it back without making eye contact. "Boarding Group 1. Have a safe flight." "Thank you," Silas said softly. He walked down the jet bridge, the cool air of the tunnel hitting his face. He was the first to board, a perk of the ticket that had cost his company nearly $15,000. He stepped onto the plane, greeted by the soft jazz music and the smell of sanitized leather. "Welcome aboard, sir. May I see your boarding pass?" The flight attendant, whose name tag read Brenda, was standing with her hands clasped, blocking the aisle. She was tall, blonde, and wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile practiced in a mirror, designed to hide disdain rather than offer warmth. Silas showed her the mobile pass, 1A. Brenda frowned. She leaned in closer, squinting at the phone screen as if checking for Photoshop artifacts. 1A? Are you sure? "It's what the ticket says," Silas said, his voice level. "Right," she sighed, a sound that conveyed she believed a mistake had been made, but she was too exhausted to fix it yet. "Go ahead. Left side?" Silas moved past her and settled into 1A. It was a suite, really. A sliding door, a lie-flat bed, a massive monitor. He placed his leather briefcase in the overhead bin and sat down, exhaling a long breath. He closed his eyes. Finally. He didn't hear the footsteps at first. He only heard the voice. It was loud, nasal, and carried the specific frequency of entitlement that Silas had spent his life dealing with in boardrooms. "Excuse me, Chief, you're in my spot." Silas opened his eyes. Standing in the aisle was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that built generic villains. He was young, maybe late 20s, wearing a suit that was too tight and a watch that was too big. His hair was slicked back with enough gel to waterproof a deck. This was Bryce Sterling. No relation to the quality of silver, but certainly representative of someone born with a spoon of it in his mouth. Behind Bryce stood Brenda, looking anxious. "I believe you're mistaken," Silas said calmly. "I'm in seat 1A. "Yeah, and that's where I sit," Bryce snapped, dropping a Gucci duffel bag onto the floor with a heavy thud. "I always sit in 1A. My father is on the board of the Platinum Travelers Club. Check your ticket again, buddy. You're probably in 11A or something. Economy Plus is back that way." Bryce pointed toward the back of the plane with a thumb, not even looking Silas in the face. He was busy typing on his phone. Silas didn't move. He didn't check his phone. He knew where he was sitting. "I don't need to check. I reserved this seat 3 weeks ago. Perhaps you should check yours." Bryce let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. He turned to Brenda. "Brenda, honey, can we handle this? I have a call with my broker in 10 minutes, and I need to get settled. This gentleman seems confused about how the hierarchy works." Brenda stepped forward. Her customer service mask had slipped, revealing pure irritation. She looked at Silas, not as a passenger, but as an obstacle. A stain on the pristine aesthetic of her first-class cabin. "Sir," Brenda said, her voice dripping with condescension, "Mr. Sterling is a Diamond Medallion member. He travels with us weekly. There has clearly been a system error. I need to see your boarding pass again." Silas unlocked his phone and held it up. The screen clearly displayed, "Silas Blackwood, Seat 1A. Brenda stared at it. She couldn't deny what it said, so she decided to deny its validity. "That looks glitchy," she said. "The system has been acting up all day. Look, let's not make a scene. Mr. Sterling actually needs this seat for business. I have a lovely seat in 4F open. It's the same service, same food. Just move back a few rows so we can get boarding underway." Silas looked at Brenda, then at Bryce, who was now smirking, tapping his foot impatiently. "No," Silas said. The word hung in the air, heavy and solid. "Excuse me?" Bryce stepped closer, invading Silas's personal space. "Did you just say no? I paid for 1A. I selected 1A. I am sitting in 1A, Silas said, unbuckling his seatbelt but remaining seated. "If there is a double booking, that is an airline issue. But I am already seated. Standard protocol suggests the seated passenger remains unless there is a safety issue. Is there a safety issue, Brenda?" Brenda's face flushed red. She wasn't used to being defied. Certainly not by someone who she felt didn't belong there. She snapped her fingers at a passing colleague. "Get the lead flight attendant, now!" Bryce leaned down, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Look, pal, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm flying to London to close a deal with Apex Zenith. Do you know who they are?" "No, of course you don't. You'll probably sell insurance. If I'm not in this seat, rested and ready, heads are going to roll, and yours is going to be the first one." Silas's left eyebrow twitched. That was the only reaction he gave. He's flying to meet. "Me?" Silas looked at Bryce's face. He recognized him now. Bryce Sterling, the son of Richard Sterling, the owner of a mid-tier logistics firm that Apex Zenith was considering acquiring. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Bryce wasn't the CEO. His father was. Bryce was just the Vice President of Strategic Vision, a made-up title for a son who couldn't be trusted with actual operations. "I suggest," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet, "that you take seat 4F, Mr. Sterling. You might find the view educational." "That's it," Bryce yelled, throwing his hands up. "I'm not dealing with this. Brenda, get him off the plane. I don't feel safe. He's threatening me." The accusation was a spark in a room full of gasoline. "He's threatening me!" The phrase echoed through the first-class cabin. Other passengers were boarding now, filing past the commotion. Eyes darted towards seat 1A. Whispers started. The narrative was being written in real time, and Silas knew exactly how it looked. An angry black man, a scared businessman, a frantic flight attendant. The lead flight attendant, a stern woman named Karen, ironically enough, marched down the aisle. She didn't ask questions. She saw Bryce Sterling, a man she recognized as a frequent flyer and big tipper, standing in distress, and she saw Silas sitting calmly. "What is the problem here?" Karen demanded. "He threatened me," Bryce lied, his voice pitching up to sound more victimized. "I asked him politely to check his ticket because there's a conflict, and he told me to watch my back. I can't fly with this man. I want him off." Karen turned her gaze on Silas. It was a glare of absolute zero. "Sir, you need to grab your bags and follow me to the jet bridge, immediately." "I have done nothing wrong," Silas said, keeping his hands visible on his lap. "I have a valid ticket. This man is lying. If you check the manifest—" "I don't need to check the manifest to know when a passenger is being disruptive," Karen snapped. "The captain has the final say on who flies. If Mr. Sterling doesn't feel safe, you are off. We have a zero-tolerance policy for aggression." "Aggression?" Silas asked, a dry chuckle escaping his lips. "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't stood up. I haven't used profanity. The only aggression here is your assumption that I am the problem." "Don't play the race card with me," Karen hissed, loud enough for the first 5 rows of economy to hear. "This is about behavior. Now get up, or I'm calling the Port Authority police." Silas looked around the cabin. A few passengers looked sympathetic, but most looked annoyed. They just wanted to take off. A woman in 2B was filming with her phone. Silas looked directly into the lens and nodded once. "Good, record it." "Call them," Silas said. Karen's jaw dropped. She wasn't expecting him to call the bluff. "Fine, Brenda, block the door. No one comes in or out." 10 minutes passed. The plane sat idle. The pilot, Captain Harrison, came out of the cockpit. He was a weary man who just wanted to get to London. After a whispered conversation with Karen and Bryce, during which Bryce made wild hand gestures, mimicking a punch, the captain nodded. 2 Port Authority officers boarded the plane. They were large, imposing, and already irritated that they had to deal with a disruptive passenger. "Sir," the first officer said, putting a hand on his belt near his taser, "we need you to exit the aircraft." "Am I under arrest?" Silas asked. "You're trespassing. The airline has revoked your ticket. If you don't leave voluntarily, you will be arrested for trespassing and resisting." Silas knew the law. He knew that technically, once the captain refused transport, he had to leave and fight it later in court. But the humiliation was the point. They wanted to drag him off. "I will leave," Silas said, standing up slowly. He smoothed his suit jacket. "But I want it noted that I was removed based on a false accusation from Mr. Sterling, facilitated by negligence from this crew." Yeah, tell it to the judge," the officer said, grabbing Silas by the upper arm and shoving him forward. "Hey," Silas snapped, pulling his arm back. "I can walk." "Resisting," the officer yelled. Before Silas could react, he was spun around. His face was pressed against the bulkhead wall. The cold click of handcuffs snapped onto his wrists. "Ow!" Silas winced as his shoulder was wrenched upward. "He's fighting! He's fighting!" Bryce yelled from the aisle, pulling out his phone to record, grinning like a shark who just smelled blood. "Look at him! Animal!" Silas was marched off the plane in cuffs. As he passed Bryce, the younger man leaned in. "You should have moved to 4F, buddy. Now you're going to jail. Enjoy the holding cell." Silas didn't look at him. He looked at Brenda, who was smirking. He looked at Karen, who was crossing his name off the manifest with a thick red marker. As they dragged him up the jet bridge, the heavy steel door of the aircraft swung shut behind him. He heard the locking mechanism click. They took him to a small, windowless room in the terminal, the airport jail. They sat him on a metal bench, still cuffed. "We're processing your paperwork," the officer said. "You're banned from Pan Atlantic Airways for life. We'll release you with a court summons for disorderly conduct." Silas took a deep breath. His heart was hammering, but his mind was ice cold. "I need to make a phone call," Silas said. "You get one call," the officer sneered. Silas nodded. He didn't call his wife. He didn't call his assistant. He dialed a number from memory, a number that bypassed secretaries and went straight to a burner phone carried by the most feared corporate litigator in New York City, Arthur Vance. No, wait. He dialed Richard the Shark Sterling. No, that was the boy's father. He dialed Jameson Ford. Jameson wasn't just a lawyer. He was the managing partner of Ford, Gates & Associates, the firm that represented Pan Atlantic Airways insurers. But more importantly, Jameson was Silas's oldest friend. "Silas?" Jameson's voice answered on the first ring. "You should be in the air. Did the Wi-Fi kick in early?" "I'm in a holding cell at JFK, Jameson," Silas said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I was handcuffed and dragged off flight 802. There was a silence on the other end. A dangerous silence. "Who did it?" Jameson asked. "Bryce Sterling. He wanted my seat. The crew backed him. They assaulted me, Jameson. They cuffed me." "Sterling?" Jameson asked. "The kid from the logistics merger, the one you're supposed to buy out tomorrow?" "The very same. And the airline?" "Pan Atlantic." Jameson let out a low whistle. "Silas, do they know? Do they know that Apex Zenith bought 40% of Pan Atlantic's debt yesterday? Do they know you are technically the largest creditor of the airline they just kicked you off of?" "No," Silas said, staring at the officer who was chewing gum and ignoring him. "They don't know, but I want them to know. I want everyone to know. Jameson, I don't just want a lawsuit. I want the pilot grounded. I want the flight crew fired. And regarding the Sterling acquisition, yes? Kill it, and call the airport legal department. Tell them if I am not released in 5 minutes with a personal apology from the airport director, I will sue the Port Authority for enough money to pave the runways with gold." "Give me 3 minutes," Jameson said. The line went dead. Silas looked up at the officer. "You might want to unlock these cuffs, officer. Your phone is about to ring, and you are going to want your hands free to answer it." The officer rolled his eyes. "Yeah, right. Sit tight, tough guy." 2 minutes and 45 seconds later, the phone on the desk rang. It was the red phone, the direct line from the commissioner. The officer froze. He stared at the phone as if it were a bomb. The red phone on the desk rang with a shrill, mechanical urgency that seemed to slice through the stale air of the holding cell. Officer Miller, the man who had shoved Silas against the wall, stared at it. He had worked at JFK for 6 years. That phone, the direct line to the Port Authority Commissioner's office, had rung exactly twice. Both times, it was because a diplomat had been detained by mistake. He picked it up, his hand trembling slightly. "Officer Miller, Terminal 4 detention." Silas watched him. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply adjusted his cufflinks, sitting with the posture of a monarch on a throne, despite the metal bench and the handcuffs biting into his wrists. "Yes, Commissioner," Miller said, his voice cracking. "Yes, sir, we have a Mr. Blackwood. Trespassing and—" "Surely, sir. No, I didn't know he was—" "I understand." Miller's face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He looked at Silas, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrible realization. "Right away, sir. I'm sorry, sir. It won't happen again." Miller hung up the phone. He didn't walk. He scrambled around the desk. He fumbled for his keys, dropping them once before jamming the small silver key into Silas's handcuffs. "Mr. Blackwood," Miller stammered, the sweat already beading on his forehead. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. The commissioner, he says you're free to go. Immediately. No charges. The record is expunged." The cuffs clicked open. Silas rubbed his wrists slowly. He stood up, towering over the officer. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Officer Miller," Silas said, his voice low and smooth like grinding stones. "It was a choice. You chose to believe a man in a cheap suit because he looked like he belonged, and you chose to humiliate me because you thought I didn't. You made a choice." "I was just following the airline's protocol. Protocol is for handling baggage. Judgment is for handling people. You failed at both." Before Miller could respond, the door to the holding cell burst open. A man in a high-end Navy suit ran in, flanked by 2 other breathless administrators. This was Frank Henderson, the director of operations for the entire airport. "Mr. Blackwood," Henderson gasped, looking as if he had just run a marathon. "Good God, I'm so sorry. Jameson Ford just called me personally. I had no idea you were in the building. If you had known I was a billionaire, you would have treated me with respect." Silas finished the sentence for him. "But because I was just a passenger in 1A, I was treated like a criminal. Is that the airport's official stance, Mr. Henderson?" Henderson froze. No, of course not. "Sir, please come to the VIP lounge. We have champagne, food, whatever you need. We can get you on the next flight to London, first class, on British Airways. On us." Silas picked up his briefcase. He checked his watch. It was 8:45 p.m. Flight 802 was scheduled to depart in 15 minutes. "I don't want a lounge," Silas said, "and I don't want another flight. I want to go back to gate B32. "The gate?" Henderson asked, confused. "But sir, flight 802. The captain refused you. We can't force him to take you back without a federal incident." "I don't want to get on the plane, Mr. Henderson," Silas said, walking past him into the hallway. "I want to watch it not take off." Henderson trotted to keep up with Silas's long, purposeful strides. "I don't understand." Silas stopped and pulled out his phone. He had 3 missed calls from his wife and 1 text from Jameson Ford. The text read, "It's done. The injunction is filed. The writ of attachment is being faxed to the tower now. You own the debt, Silas. Technically, you own the fuel in their tanks." Silas typed back, "Let it burn." He turned to Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, do you know who owns the debt structure of Pan Atlantic Airways?" I believe it's a consortium of banks," Henderson said. "It was," Silas corrected. "Until yesterday afternoon. Apex Zenith acquired the distress portfolio. I am effectively the landlord of that aircraft, and I have just instructed my legal team to seize the asset due to a breach of contract regarding passenger safety and brand liability. That plane isn't going to London. It's going to the hangar, and I want to be there when Bryce Sterling walks off." Henderson stared at him. The scale of the revenge was just hitting him. This wasn't a complaint letter. This was corporate execution. I can get you a cart," Henderson said, his tone shifting from apologetic to reverent. "Do that." As they rode the electric cart back through the terminal, people turned to stare. 10 minutes ago, Silas had been dragged through here in cuffs, head bowed but dignified. Now, he was riding with the airport director, looking like a conquering general returning to the front lines. They arrived at gate B32 just as the gate agent, Patricia, the one who had aggressively checked his passport, was closing the jet bridge door. She looked up and saw Silas. Her jaw dropped. "Mr. Henderson?" she squeaked. We already processed the removal." "Open the door, Patricia," Henderson ordered. "But the plane is pushing back," she argued. "The tug is attached." "I said open the door," Henderson barked. Patricia scrambled to the console and punched in the code. The heavy door swung open. Silas walked to the window of the terminal, overlooking the tarmac. The massive Boeing 777 was indeed pushing back, its red navigation lights blinking. Inside that metal tube, Bryce Sterling was likely toasting his victory, stretching out in the seat he had stolen. Silas lifted his phone to his ear. He didn't call the airline. He dialed a number he had saved for tomorrow morning's meeting. "Hello?" A gruff, older voice answered. "Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Logistics." "Richard," Silas said calmly. "It's Silas Blackwood." "Silas?" Richard sounded surprised. "It's late. We're meeting tomorrow at 9. Is everything okay?" "My son Bryce is flying out to meet us. He should be in the air now." "Your son isn't going to make the meeting, Richard," Silas said, watching the plane on the tarmac stop moving abruptly. "And neither are you." "What? What are you talking about?" "I'm at JFK. Your son had me arrested because he wanted my seat. He used your name. He said, 'My father is on the board.' He threatened me, Richard, and then he laughed while the police cuffed me." There was a silence on the line, a terrified silence. Richard Sterling knew exactly who Silas Blackwood was. He knew Silas could buy and sell his entire lineage before breakfast. "Silas, please. He's an idiot. He's a spoiled kid. I'll make him apologize. I'll fly him back. Don't let this affect the deal. The merger is my life's work." "The deal is dead, Richard," Silas said coldly. "And tell your board that when the stock plummets tomorrow morning, they can thank Bryce. Oh, and Richard, turn on the news." Silas hung up. Out on the tarmac, the tug driver had stopped. The pilot's voice crackled over the radio, audible even through the glass, as the gate agents listened in horror. "Tower to flight 802. Stop pushback immediately. Repeat. Stop pushback. Return to gate. We have a federal seizure order on the aircraft." Inside the first-class cabin of Flight 802, the atmosphere was celebratory, at least for one person. Bryce Sterling had fully reclined the seat in 1A. He had kicked off his shoes, his socks resting on the ottoman. A glass of pre-departure champagne was balanced on his chest. "Can I get a refill, sweetheart?" he called out, waving the empty glass without looking up. Brenda, the flight attendant who had facilitated the removal of Silas, hurried over with a bottle. She was still riding the adrenaline high of the confrontation. In her mind, she had protected a high-value customer from a security threat. She felt righteous. "Here you go, mister." "Sterling," she cooed, pouring the bubbly liquid. "So sorry about that unpleasantness earlier. We don't usually get that sort in first class." "Tell me about it," Bryce laughed, taking a sip. "Guy probably used stolen miles or something. Thought he could just intimidate his way into the prime spot." "You did good, Brenda. I'll be sure to mention your name in my feedback letter to the airline. Maybe get you a commendation." "Oh, thank you, sir," Brenda beamed. The plane shuddered as the tug began to push it back from the gate. The safety video began to play on the screens. Bryce closed his eyes, visualizing the deal he was going to oversee in London. He was going to walk into the Apex Zenith office, shake hands with the partners, and take credit for his father's hard work. It was going to be easy. Then the motion stopped. It wasn't a slow stop. It was a jerk, violent enough to slosh champagne onto Bryce's shirt. "Hey," he yelled, sitting up, "watch the driving." The engines, which had been winding up with a low whine, suddenly spooled down. The lights in the cabin flickered and went to full bright. The silence that followed was heavy. "What's happening?" a passenger in 2F asked. "Probably just a traffic hold," Brenda reassured them, though she looked confused. She walked to the interphone and pressed the button to call the cockpit. "Captain, is everything all right?" The passengers watched her face. It went from professional polite to sheer confusion, and then to pale dread. "What do you mean, return to gate?" she whispered. But in the quiet cabin, everyone heard it. "What seizure?" She hung up the phone slowly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Harrison's voice came over the PA system. He sounded furious. Folks, I apologize, but we have been ordered by air traffic control to return to the gate immediately. Apparently there is a legal injunction against the aircraft." Murmurs of "What?" and "I have a connection." "Now," erupted. Bryce slammed his glass down. "This is ridiculous. I have a meeting." He grabbed his phone. He had 0 bars of signal inside the metal tube, but the plane was reconnecting to the gate Wi-Fi as they were pulled back in. Messages started flooding his phone. "Dad, pick up the phone. Dad, Bryce, what did you do?" "Dad, answer me." Bryce frowned. Why was his dad yelling? He started typing back. "Relax, Dad. Some idiot on the plane caused a delay. We're pushing back now." The plane docked with a thud. The seatbelt sign turned off. "This flight is cancelled," the captain announced, his voice defeated. "We have been informed that the aircraft has been seized by the creditor. Everyone needs to deplane immediately. Police are meeting the aircraft." "Police?" Bryce scoffed. "Good. Maybe they found drugs in that guy's bag." The cabin door opened, but it wasn't the regular gate agents who stepped on. It was 2 federal marshals, followed by a man in a suit. Frank Henderson. "Everyone remains seated," the marshal shouted. Bryce rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, I'm a Diamond member. Let me off first." He unbuckled his belt and stood up, grabbing his Gucci bag. "Sit down." The marshal pointed a finger at him. "I'm Bryce Sterling." "My father, we know who you are," the marshal said, "and you're the reason this plane isn't flying." The passengers turned on him instantly. The collective rage of 200 people who just had their vacations ruined focused like a laser on seat 1A. "What did you do?" the woman in 2B demanded. "I didn't do anything," Bryce yelled, his voice cracking. "Mr. Sterling," Henderson stepped forward, "please collect your belongings, and you as well, Brenda." "And Karen." "Me?" Brenda gasped, clutching her chest. "I'm crew." "Not anymore," Henderson said coldly. "The owner of the aircraft has stipulated that the crew who facilitated the assault on the previous passenger are to be removed from the premises pending an investigation into civil rights violations." "Assault?" Bryce laughed nervously. "Nobody was assaulted. The guy was trespassing." "Get off the plane," the marshal ordered. Bryce grabbed his bag, his face red. "Fine, I'll charter a private jet. You people are incompetent." He stomped down the aisle. As he exited the plane and walked up the jet bridge, he was preparing a speech in his head. A speech he would scream at the gate agent. But when he stepped out into the terminal, the scream died in his throat. Standing there, right in the center of the gate area, was Silas Blackwood. Silas wasn't in cuffs. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, flanked by 2 other lawyers who had arrived with miraculous speed and the chief of airport police. The passengers filing off behind Bryce stopped. They saw the man who had been dragged off. They saw him standing like a king. "You," Bryce stammered. "How did you—" Silas took 1 step forward. The crowd parted. "Hello, Bryce," Silas said. The calmness of his voice was more terrifying than any shout. "Did you enjoy the seat? For the 12 minutes you had it?" You called someone," Bryce accused, pointing a shaking finger. "You pulled strings. This is illegal. My father is going to sue you." "Your father," Silas said, holding up his phone, which was currently displaying a live video call, "is right here." Silas turned the screen around. Richard Sterling's face was on the screen, red and sweaty, sitting in his home office. "Dad!" Bryce yelled. "Dad, tell them who we are." "Shut up, Bryce," Richard roared through the speakerphone. The sound echoed through the silent gate area. "Shut your mouth. Do you know who that man is? Do you have any idea what you've done? He's nobody. He was in my seat. That is Silas Blackwood," Richard screamed. "He is the CEO of Apex Zenith. He is the man buying our company. Or he was. He just pulled the deal, Bryce. He just pulled the financing. We're bankrupt. The stock is going to 0 in the morning." Bryce felt the blood drain from his face. His knees felt like water. He looked at Silas, the man he had called Chief, the man he had told to move to economy. "You?" Bryce whispered. "You're Blackwood." "And you," Silas said, stepping closer, "are a liability. I told you, Bryce. I told you that you might find the view from Seat 4F educational, but you didn't listen. So now you're going to learn a harder lesson." Silas turned to the police chief. "Chief, I'd like to file formal charges against Mr. Sterling for filing a false police report, harassment, and interference with a flight crew. I have the video evidence from the passengers." "We have it, Mr. Blackwood," the chief said, taking out his handcuffs. "Mr. Sterling, turn around." No, wait." Bryce backed up, bumping into Brenda, who was standing there weeping, her airline badge already stripped from her uniform. "Dad, do something!" Bryce wailed as the cuffs clicked onto his wrists, the same sound Silas had heard an hour ago. "I can't do anything, son," Richard said softly, his voice broken. "You picked a fight with God." Silas ended the call. He watched as Bryce was led away, weeping, humiliated, exactly the way Silas had been, but without an ounce of the dignity. Silas turned to the crowd of stranded passengers. They were angry, confused, and looking for someone to blame. "Ladies and gentlemen," Silas raised his voice, I apologize for the inconvenience. This flight is cancelled because the crew proved themselves unfit to ensure the safety and dignity of all passengers. However, he gestured to Henderson, I have arranged for 3 charter planes to take you all to London. Departure is in 2 hours, open bar, and for every passenger here, Apex Zenith will be cutting a check for $5,000 as compensation for your time. A hush fell over the crowd. Then someone started clapping, then another. Soon the entire gate was cheering. Silas didn't smile. He just nodded. He turned to walk away, but he stopped in front of Brenda and Karen. They were standing with their union rep, looking terrified. Mr. Blackwood, Karen started, her voice trembling. I was just following. You judged me, Silas said, looking her in the eye. You looked at my skin, and you looked at his suit, and you made a decision. You will never work in aviation again. I will make sure of it. He walked away, his lawyer Jameson Ford falling into step beside him. That was expensive, Jameson noted, looking at the cheering crowd. Charter planes? $5,000 a head? Cheaper than a PR crisis, Silas shrugged. Besides, I'm buying the airline next week. I need the customers to like me. And Sterling? Jameson asked. Silas stopped at the exit of the terminal. The rain had stopped. The city lights of New York twinkled in the distance. Destroy them, Silas said. Legally. I want the logistics company dismantled. Buy the assets for pennies on the dollar when they declare bankruptcy next month. But leave Richard his house. I'm not a monster. And Bryce? Silas checked his cuffs again. Let him sit in the cell for the full 48 hours. Let him see how comfortable the seat is. The sunrise over Manhattan the next morning was brilliant. But inside the penthouse office of Richard Sterling, the mood was apocalyptic. Richard sat at his mahogany desk, staring at the massive flat-screen TV on the wall. It wasn't the financial news he usually watched. It was Global News Network, and the headline was screaming in bold red letters, #Seat 1A, the billionaire and the brat. The internet had weaponized the incident. A passenger in row 2B had uploaded a video of Bryce standing over Silas, screaming, "He threatened me!" Another angle showed Bryce crying for his father while being handcuffed. The hashtag #Seat1. A had 50 million impressions overnight. Reddit threads had already doxed Bryce's entire history, digging up old tweets where he complained about poor people ruining the vibe in Aspen. Mr. Sterling? Richard looked up. His secretary, Beatrice, stood in the doorway looking terrified. The board of directors is on line 1, she whispered. They're calling an emergency vote of no confidence, and the bank is on line 2. They're calling the revolving credit facility immediately. Richard slammed his fist on the desk. They can't do that. The merger with Apex Zenith covers the debt. Tell them it's just a delay. I can't tell them that, sir, Beatrice said, her voice shaking. Mr. Blackwood issued a press release at 6 a.m. She handed him a tablet. Apex Zenith terminates acquisition of Sterling Logistics. Reason, cited, discovery of systemic ethical liabilities and leadership volatility. Apex Zenith will instead pursue a hostile acquisition of distressed assets post-bankruptcy. Hostile acquisition, Richard whispered, sinking into his chair. He's waiting for us to die so he can pick the meat off the bones. Meanwhile, in a holding cell at Queen's Central Booking, Bryce Sterling was experiencing a different kind of hell. He had spent the night on a metal bench, his expensive suit stained with sweat, his Italian loafers scuffed. The heavy door clanked open, and a guard shouted, "Sterling, lawyer!" Bryce shot up, relief washing over him. Finally, where is Garrison? He was led into a small meeting room. But instead of his family's high-powered attorney, he found a tired-looking man with a cheap briefcase. "Who are you?" Bryce demanded. "Where is Garrison?" "Mr. Garrison requires a retainer," the man said, sitting down. "I'm Henderson, your court-appointed public defender." "Public defender?" Bryce laughed nervously. "My father is Richard Sterling. He pays the bills. Get Garrison on the phone." Your father's assets have been frozen pending an SEC investigation, Henderson said flatly. Mr. Blackwood's team handed over a dossier to the feds this morning. Allegations of inflating asset values. Your dad is fighting to stay out of prison, Bryce. He can't help you. Bryce went pale. What? You're on your own, Henderson continued, opening a file. And the district attorney is making an example of you. They're charging you with interference with a flight crew, filing a false police report, and federal wire fraud. Wire fraud? You texted your father during a federal seizure of the aircraft. It's a reach, but the public wants blood. Bail is set at $500,000. Since your father's accounts are frozen, you're going to Rikers Island until trial. Bryce slumped into the chair, the reality finally piercing his delusion. No, this can't be real. Back in the pristine, glass-walled offices of Apex Zenith, Silas Blackwood stood looking out over the city. Jameson Ford sat on the leather sofa, sipping an espresso. You know, the lawyer said, you could have just sued them. This scorched earth policy seems personal. It is personal, Silas said, not turning away from the window. Jameson, when I sat in that cell, I wasn't a billionaire. I was just a black man in a suit who didn't belong. If I didn't have this money, I would be Bryce right now. I would be in that system. He turned around, his face hard. But I'm not Bryce. I'm the one holding the hammer. Well, the hammer has fallen, Jameson noted. Sterling Logistics stock is down 70%. They have 48 hours to find $200 million, or they file for Chapter 11. They won't find it, Silas said. Richard has been cooking the books for years. That's why he was so desperate for the merger. I knew it 3 weeks ago. I was flying to London to offer him a lifeline, a buyout that would have saved his company, but stripped his control. I was going to be merciful. Silas walked to his desk and sat down. But then his son decided he wanted my seat. And now, I'm done with mercy. The intercom on his desk buzzed. Mr. Blackwood, his assistant's voice crackled. Mr. Richard Sterling is in the lobby. He says he won't leave until he sees you. He's crying, sir. Silas looked at Jameson. A cold, predatory smile touched his lips. Send him up. Richard Sterling looked 10 years older than he had 24 hours ago. His suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't walk into Silas's office. He shuffled. Silas didn't stand up. He didn't offer a hand. He just gestured to the chair opposite him. Silas, Richard began, his voice trembling. Please, you have to stop this. Stop what, Richard? Silas asked calmly. I'm just a passenger. I have no control over the SEC or the district attorney. You leaked the audit, Richard accused, though there was no fire in it. You sent the files to the feds. They're talking about prison time, Silas. For me, I built that company from nothing. You built it on fraud, Silas corrected. I saw the numbers. You've been counting future projections as current revenue. It's a Ponzi scheme, Richard. I was going to fix it. I was going to absorb the debt and restructure you. But then, Bryce, Richard spat the name like a curse. He's an idiot. I know he's an idiot. But he's my son. He's in Rikers, Silas. He's getting beaten up. He called me an hour ago, begging for protection money. Karma is a difficult teacher, Silas said, but she is thorough. Richard took a deep breath. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a file. I have a counter-offer, Richard said. I have found another buyer, a private equity firm called Orion Holdings. They contacted me this morning. They are willing to buy Sterling Logistics for $50 million. It's a fraction of what it's worth, but it's enough to pay off the bank and keep me out of jail. I just need you to release the debt lien you hold so the sale can go through. Silas looked at the file. Orion Holdings. He picked up the paper, studying it. So you want me to forgive the debt I bought from Pan Atlantic, which is secured by your personal assets, so you can sell your company to this Orion and walk away clean? Yes, Richard said. Please, if you do this, I will publicly apologize. I will make Bryce plead guilty. I will do whatever you want. Just let me sell to Orion. Silas paused. He looked at Richard, a man who had raised a son to believe he was better than everyone else, now begging a man he had underestimated. "Fine," Silas said. Richard's head snapped up. "What?" "I will release the lien," Silas said, "on one condition. You sign the sale agreement with Orion Holdings right now, here, in front of me, and you resign as CEO immediately." "Done," Richard said, tears of relief streaming down his face. "Thank you, Silas. Thank you. You're a better man than I am." Jameson Ford walked in with a notary. The papers were drawn up. Richard Sterling signed away his life's work to Orion Holdings for $50 million, enough to pay his debts, but leaving him with almost nothing. "It's finished," Richard said, signing the last page. "Orion owns it now." He stood up, looking relieved. "I'll go to the press. I'll clear your name." "My name was never dirty, Richard," Silas said quietly. "But there is one thing you should know about Orion Holdings." Richard paused at the door. "What?" Silas pressed a button on his desk phone. "Sarah, can you come in here, please?" The door opened. A young woman walked in. Sarah, the quiet, overlooked analyst from Richard Sterling's own strategy department. The woman Richard had passed over for promotion 5 times to give the job to Bryce. "Sarah?" Richard looked confused. "What are you doing here?" "Hello, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, her voice steady. Or should I say former CEO Sterling. "Sarah is the managing director of Orion Holdings," Silas revealed, leaning back in his chair. "A shell company I established 3 years ago for special acquisitions." Richard froze. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. "You?" Richard whispered. "You are Orion?" "I am," Silas nodded. "You just sold me your company for $50 million. The company that, even with the fraud, has assets worth $400 million if managed correctly." "You stole it!" Richard screamed. "You tricked me!" "I didn't trick you," Silas said, cold as ice. "I offered you a lifeline. You took it. I told you I was going to acquire you. I just did it at an 85% discount." Silas stood up and walked around the desk. "And here is the twist, Richard. Since I now own the company, I own the corporate legal defense fund. I am cutting funding for your legal defense regarding the SEC charges. You're on your own." Richard fell back into the chair, gasping for air. "And Sarah?" Silas turned to the young woman. "What is your first order of business as the new CEO of Sterling Logistics?" Sarah smiled. It was the smile of someone who had been silenced for years and finally found her voice. "I'm initiating a clawback lawsuit against the Sterling Family Trust," Sarah said, looking Richard in the eye. "We are going to recover every dollar of company money that was used to pay for Bryce's cars, his apartment, and his consulting fees. By the time we are done, the estate will be bankrupt." Richard looked from Sarah to Silas. He realized the trap hadn't just snapped shut. It had been built around him while he slept. "Why?" Richard whispered. "All of this. For a seat?" Silas walked to the window, looking at the city that he now owned a little bit more of. "It wasn't about the seat, Richard. It was about the entitlement. It was about the fact that your son thought the world owed him comfort at the expense of my dignity. And you let him believe it." Silas turned back. "Get out of my office. And tell Bryce I said hello. I hear the seats on the bus to Rikers are quite firm." 3 months later, the air inside the Federal District Court of New York was stiflingly hot. The room was packed. The Seat 1A case had become a national sensation, a symbol of the war between earned power and inherited entitlement. Bryce Sterling sat at the defense table. He looked nothing like the arrogant man on the plane. His hair was grown out and unkempt, his skin pale from 90 days in Rikers Island, awaiting trial. He wore an orange jumpsuit, not a bespoke suit. In the gallery, Richard Sterling sat alone. He looked frail. His wife had left him when the assets were frozen. His friends from the country club had stopped returning his calls the moment the news of the bankruptcy broke. He was wearing a suit that was clearly old. The elbows were shiny, and it hung loosely on his frame. Silas Blackwood did not attend. He didn't need to. He had sent Jameson Ford to observe. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Merrick Garland, no relation to the Attorney General but a man known for his disdain for white-collar nonsense, swept into the room. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at Bryce. "Mr. Sterling," the judge began, his voice echoing in the silent room, "you have pleaded guilty to 1 count of interference with a flight crew and 1 count of wire fraud. Your attorney has asked for probation, citing your youth and lack of prior criminal history. However, the court has received a victim impact statement from the passengers of Flight 802. The judge picked up a stack of letters. 200 people were stranded. Careers were impacted. But more importantly, you utilized a false sense of authority to strip a man of his civil rights simply because you felt entitled to his space. This behavior is a cancer in our society." Bryce trembled. He looked back at his father. Richard looked down at his shoes. "Bryce Sterling," the judge said, slamming the gavel soundlessly onto the block before speaking, "I am sentencing you to 36 months in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You are also ordered to pay restitution of $150,000 to the airline, which, I note, is now owned by the victim, Mr. Blackwood." "3 years!" Bryce screamed, standing up. "No, Dad, do something!" "Sit down!" the bailiff shouted, grabbing Bryce. "Dad!" Bryce wailed as he was cuffed. But Richard Sterling didn't move. He couldn't. He had no money for appeals. He had no influence. He was just an old man watching the consequences of his own parenting being dragged away in chains. 1 year later. The rain was hammering against the glass of Terminal 4 at JFK, much like it had on that fateful night. Silas Blackwood walked down the jet bridge. He was flying to London again. Apex Zenith had successfully turned the airline around. It was now called Apex Air, and it was the most profitable carrier in the Atlantic corridor. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood," the flight attendant said. She was young, diverse, and genuinely smiling. "Welcome to Seat 1A. "Thank you, Jessica," Silas said warmly. He sat down. The seat was comfortable. He accepted a glass of sparkling water. He picked up a copy of the Financial Times left on the console. On the front page, there was a small article in the bottom corner. "Former logistics mogul evicted from Hampton's estate." Richard Sterling, former CEO of Sterling Logistics, was formally evicted from his East Hampton home yesterday after failing to pay property taxes. The property was purchased at auction by the Blackwood Foundation, which plans to convert the estate into a summer camp for underprivileged inner-city youth. Silas smiled, a genuine, small smile. He turned the page. "Sterling Logistics, now operating as Orion Global under the leadership of CEO Sarah Jenkins, reported record profits this quarter. The company has announced a new hiring initiative for formerly incarcerated non-violent offenders, giving them a second chance at life." Silas folded the paper. The plane began to push back. There was no Bryce Sterling to stop it. There were no sneering flight attendants. There was just the hum of the engines and the feeling of absolute, terrifying justice. He looked out the window as the plane taxied past the hangars. He saw a baggage handler working in the rain, tossing bags onto a cart. The man looked familiar. He was older, grey-haired, moving slowly, struggling with the weight of a heavy duffel bag. Silas squinted. It was Richard, working for the very airline his son had tried to command, earning minimum wage, loading the bags of the people he used to look down on. Silas closed the window shade. He didn't need to see any more. The circle was complete. The captain's voice came over the intercom. A new captain. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 802 to London. We're expecting a smooth ride tonight. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the service." Silas reclined his seat. He closed his eyes, and this time nobody woke him up. And that is how Silas Blackwood proved that true power isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about being the one who holds the keys. Bryce and Richard Sterling learned the hard way that when you try to steal a king's throne, you'd better be ready for the kingdom to fall on your head. It's a brutal lesson in karma. Never judge a book by its cover, and never ever judge a passenger by their seat number. I want to know what you would have done. If you were Silas, would you have been merciful and let Richard keep his house, or did they deserve every single bit of that hard karma? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge and justice, please blast that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you'll never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.